principles, we'll read them out, and then we're going to give an example of how that could be used in a landscape. So Jennifer will give examples for a garden or land, and then we'll also talk about an example for a social scape, how they can be applied to the structure of a group or a social project or community project.
If you want to design a garden or a landscape, the first thing is to spend time literally in that space and observing what is there, what isn't there, how it feels, what comes into that area, like from the outside, where the sun is, where the shade is, where the wind comes from, how much rain there is, how much dry it is, what the soil is like. All these observations which you then put together and interact with to begin to conceive of what a design could be for that space that is unique to that space, but which also takes on board what is already happening there.
And just as you can do that on a garden, we completely do that in all the work in FoodFutures. So if we're starting a new project, like the schools project, we wouldn't just go into a community and enforce an idea. We'd spend some time getting to know the schools, understanding what's already been done, who the staff are, what resources they have, who are the really passionate parents who want something to happen, who are the passionate teachers or the catering staff. And so once you've got an idea of what you're working with in the social space, so who are your key people to work with, how are spaces used by people, what are the dreams of the people that you're working with, what have they done before and hasn't worked. Once you've really observed what already has happened, that's when you start to interact and understand what you might design or create from a project.
Also, it's important to note where the problems lie and where there are gaps, or where there may even be wounds that need healing, and also in the social sphere. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Right, now, what is energy? In the garden or in a house, energy is easier to understand in its physics, in the terms of physics. So that could be light or sunshine or wind or water or movement of people, anything that comes into a space and that has a power to make a change in that space. And the principle is to catch it and to use it and to store it before it goes out again. So an example of capturing wind, for example, is if a wind turbine is a classic example of that, but also if you want to dry laundry, it's good to have a space where the wind's going to get it, so that you're capturing the energy of the wind to dry the laundry before the wind moves forward. Or water, if you've got water coming through, it's good to capture some of it in water butts, and also to create your landscape so that the soil naturally absorbs the water rather than flooding off, and so on. So that there are many different kinds of energy, and it may also be something that is coming into the space, like, for example, people. You may have people coming through the space and they bring their own energy with them, and how can you engage them or capture their energy in the garden such that it will be a positive contribution?
For a social example, our strategy development process is a perfect example. We knew by asking people what do they dream of, that people would get inspired and excited and have ideas, and that was the moment to support people in starting to create them. So through our strategy development process, the people that came that showed a lot of enthusiasm, we met up with after, we directed them to where they could get more involved, and some projects have started through that process, such as a schools project.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. The third principle is to obtain a yield. And in a garden, it's pretty easy to understand what that means. And here we are standing in front of an apple tree, which is just about ripe. And so I could have chosen different trees. In fact, I have chosen other trees, but the reason I chose this tree was so that the yield would be apples. But a tree, there are different kinds of yields. It isn't just what we can eat. What the yield is here is berries for birds to eat, and in the summer months, which we're not anymore, it's flowers for bees, and also something to look out on. In a garden, there's lots of different ways of obtaining a yield. Here we have, for example, herbs, which are at the moment good there for the bees, but we can also drink them or eat them. And I'm going to show you I've got a little yield here. You see this? This is not a bit of string. What this is a length of bindweed that I extracted, and I've used it to tie up. So I got a yield out of the bindweed. Here we have the washing line, and one of the yields of this washing line is dry laundry, because the predominant wind just comes through, and so I'm getting dry laundry as a yield from having a washing line.
Obtaining a yield can be applied to social systems, and in my head I always have, how can I obtain multiple yields? So let's think about the magazine that we've just launched. So that in itself is a yield. We're creating a product that people can use to read, to get inspiration, to motivate people. But we can also design the process that we create the magazine in such a way as to build connections, so we can meet more people locally. We can also maybe in time fundraise from it to support us in then being able to invest that money back into FoodFutures work to start new projects. And we can also use a process of supporting people to write, how we do the editing and things like that in such a way as to upskill people, to support people in becoming better writers. And one framework that I find useful in thinking about yields is the multiple forms of capital model. So it gets you to think about how you can build social capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital, all these different things that we'll link to when you're thinking about social design and projects. I think it's obvious how that plays out in social projects. But designing feedback loops is so crucial for permaculture design, because it allows you to evolve projects and slowly improve them in response to how people interact. So in FoodFutures, our meetings always end with a closing circle. So we ask, how was that meeting for you? And if people use that well, they'll tell us whether the meeting was run really well and what they enjoyed, or what could be improved. And that feedback round then improves future meetings. And in our projects, we always build in an evaluation or feedback cycle there. So in the strategy, we're going to run an annual feedback cycle to help us adapt it. Self-regulation is something that I guess is a lifetime practice, but it asks us to also self-reflect on how we are in a space and what we bring into a space. So this is quite brutal doing it yeah, but I know that I can be a control freak. I can also I'm very sensitive to spotting when people are excluded, and I can also get very angry if people bring a culture or something that I consider rude or completely inappropriate. So when I'm in spaces, I have to reflect on how I'm feeling and control that in order to be as my better self in this space. And collaborative working asks us to do that. And when we're bringing people with whole different worldviews together, it asks us to constantly think about our own blind spots, what we don't know about, and develop our own empathy to understand other perspectives and situations in order to find that middle ground where we can work together.
And often we encounter what those things are, not because we've thought about them or we're aware of them, but because we're blind to them. And somebody says something to us that, or somebody holds forth in a way that we feel angry about. And so then the question becomes, well, what is it? Why is this happening? Why do I feel angry? What is this challenging for me? But I'd like to use that principle of feedback and self-regulation here in the garden. So for example, I have here a blueberry patch. And one of my blueberry bushes here, it's got plenty of blueberries on it, but the bush itself is yellow and it's not terribly happy. And so my feedback is, I haven't been observing the soil properly, because blueberries need acid soil, and when it starts going yellow like that means that they don't have the acid available, and I need to be changing my action towards this blueberry patch to bring more acidity to the soil so that the leaves will actually grow and it will be happier. But then my self-regulation comes in when I have to ask myself, well, how many blueberry plants is it really reasonable to have, and am I being greedy? And maybe blueberry plants are not what want to grow here at all. Maybe it's not appropriate for blueberry because currant is marvelous. Currant is the happiest Larry here, and so maybe my self-regulation is to say, Jenny, you don't have to have 150 different kinds of berries in your garden. You know, currants are doing just fine. So that's just in the garden an example of observation, feedback, and self-regulation. The social aspect of applying feedback. I come from California, where we express things and we talk, and I've had to learn, living in Britain, to shut up, basically, you know. And in the beginning, people had to actually tell me, Jenny, shut up. You know, now when I'm in a meeting, I have to actually bite my tongue. That's my self-regulation.
I guess this is really twisting our whole view of humans. I think it's very easy within the environmental world to see as humans as something that is negative and we're destructive. But if we can see humans as an incredible resource that can play an amazing role in bringing about healing and caring going forwards, it really shifts how we view that. And when we talk about FoodFutures in our meetings, we really see every single person that comes as someone who brings huge potential and has a valuable range of skills and ideas to contribute to us. And so we really welcome every single person who comes in, and our role then is just about supporting them and finding their place within our social ecosystem, so that they know how they can use their skills well.
Wood is a renewable resource, and I have a wood burning stove here, and I don't buy wood because I have enough of things that I prune in my garden and that I dry, which are a resource to me. And you could say, well, it's actually a waste, and I could send them to the tip, but I don't. I use them as kindling, and I have larger wood as well. Either from my garden or from other people's gardens that I use for log. Another resource is seeds. And Anna has been very instrumental in saving seeds and starting seed project here in Lancaster. But it's a cycle. And we sow them and they grow. And then if we harvest the seeds themselves, then it is a cycle. It is a resource that carries on. One classic way in the garden to produce no waste is to have a compost bin. Now this is a worm compost bin, and I just want to show you, it's absolutely wonderful. All the little worms and the creatures that are in there. Just can you look down there and see all the worms that are there? It's absolutely amazing. And this is a community compost bin. And many of the neighbors who don't want to deal with compost in their own garden come over with their kitchen waste, which I've invited them to do. And so this is a kind of community compost bin of producing no waste.
So in social systems, this can be harder to imagine, but let's take conflict as an amazing example. How many projects or family meals or anything can you think of which has collapsed because a conflict has come about and people left it? And that's such just a wasted use of rich learning, if we can see conflict as actually that coming together of edges and worldviews and an amazing space for learning and creating new, unique solutions, we can actually use that conflict and transform it into something pretty amazing and exciting.
So here, when I moved into this house 15 years ago, there was nothing in this garden. And the pattern, the big pattern that I wanted to create was that of a woodland. And so I planted this tree. It was about this big at the time. It was about 3 feet tall. Because it's a wood, it is a characteristic native tree. And everything that I've planted underneath it has been with the idea of being what would grow naturally in a woodland, but a woodland that was also cultivated to be able to harvest good things from the woodland. So it's renewable every year. All of the different plants continue to grow, and every year there's a harvest. And the pattern, the big pattern, is a woodland, but it's in miniature because we're in a suburb.
Yeah, and when we're talking about social spaces, let's think about how groups work. Like, if we are all part of a community group, I'm sure you're familiar with tense meetings, how in projects there can be, when they're starting, they can be quite hard to get going, and then they reach like a period of stability, but then they might collapse and things might feel like they're all going to die and the whole project will stop. And that sort of pattern, or the cycle that projects go through, thankfully, is quite a common phenomena. And we can zoom out and look at general patterns around how groups function and work and the cycles they go through to help us just zoom out a little bit and detach ourselves from things when they go wrong or they're a little bit hard, and take learnings from what other groups have done to try and help build health back into how our groups run. And as an example, in FoodFutures, we've started noticing over the last few years that our working groups are great, but they are, at the moment, they have a pattern of just generating more and more and more ideas, which is amazing at certain periods of a project. But right now, we have so much going on that we can't take on more ideas. So in spotting that pattern, we can now respond to it and design in spaces that are for idea generation when we know we have the capacity and ability to support them. And we can start to design other spaces to actually just be about developing ideas and supporting them and becoming a reality.